Welcome to another edition of Inside of the War Room. Ryan Ray here, as always. And today's guest is a guest I've wanted to get on for quite some time. We've been working on this in the background as he released a book. It looks like March 19th of this year. I didn't realize it had been that long. I'm talking about an energy analyst, expert, guru extraordinaire, Omid Shokri. Omid, it's great to have you on. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope you have a great discussion about my book and about the energy geopolitics around the world.
Yeah, well, okay. So your book is titled, and we'll link to this in the show notes. It's called U.S. Energy Diplomacy in the Caspian Sea Basin. That's a
Yeah.
very almost specific title for those who may aren't familiar with this area of the world. Why don't you break down what area exactly you're referring to and why is it so important?
Yeah, it's a very good question. During Bush administration, the U.S. import about 70% of oil from the Middle East, and it is not, as you know, diversification of energy resources is a key actor in every country energy policy. That time, Bush administration and his energy secretary of energy and other national security advisor for White House came together that they think that the importing 70% of oil from the Middle East is against U.S. national security, and they trying to find the alternative for the Middle East, and they focus to Caspian Sea as an alternative, one of alternative for oil from the Persian Gulf and Middle East. Before the Bush administration, as you know, during the Clinton administration, when Soviet Union breakdown, U.S. tried to help these countries to recover their economy, tried to independence from Russia, and try to bring oil and gas from this region without using influence, without using infrastructure, and without using energy research to bring market, mainly EU market. Due to U.S. During Clinton administration and Bush administration, mainly focused to Central Asia and Caspian Sea. As you are aware, during Bush administration, U.S. has two military operation in Iraq and Afghanistan, and U.S. uses military base in the Central Asia and also Caspian Sea to support and to send the military weapons and the troops to Afghanistan to support their troops in the region. Due to this condition, oil import from the Middle East and U.S. presence in the region, especially in Afghanistan, U.S. focused on Central Asia and Caspian Sea, and I try to focus this topic. What's the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administration policy toward the international energy market in general, and especially toward Caspian Sea?
Okay, yeah. So you covered a lot of ground there, and in the book you have, I believe it's 9 different areas. Is that right? 9 different areas that you wanted to work through in the book. And so maybe it'd be helpful just to kind of take each one of those one by one and kind of work through them. And so now that you kind of laid out the thesis here, and so the first one is what role does energy play in explaining the U.S. foreign policy towards the global energy market, and particularly in the Caspian Basin? And it's a fascinating question because on the American side of the equation, I think it's always hard for the Americans to understand how much energy and security is really influencing how we're doing things. I always try to say um, the ability to have the reserve currency backs a lot of what we do as well. So, what was kind of your thoughts on this, and why lead with this question?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Let me give you more information about the book, and if we concentrate it chapter by chapter, we can focus more in U.S. Role of energy and energy export in U.S. policy toward the global, and it's mainly toward the Central Asia and Caspian Sea. The book combines 7 chapters. The first and second chapter about the introduction and about the theoretical framework. The third chapter about the literature review. I read about 700 papers, reports, and also made an interview with more than 100 former U.S. ambassadors to the region, an energy and foreign policy expert who works in the Washington-based think tanks, some professor from the Harvard and other universities, some European diplomat, and some diplomats from the region. In the chapter 4, I focused on the international context of energy geopolitics in the Caspian Sea, and I have to focus energy policy and foreign policy of 5 coastal sea, I mean Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan, and also I try to find any interaction between EU policy toward Caspian Sea, India, China, and uh, finally, U.S. In the other chapter, in the chapter 5, I focused on George W. Bush energy policy to energy diplomacy toward Caspian Sea. Another chapter, Obama administration. In the chapter 6, Trump and Biden administration. And the chapter 7 is conclusion. What's the role of energy in U.S. foreign policy? What's the shale gas revolution in international relations? What's the shale gas revolution in EU? U.S. foreign policy and U.S. energy policy and its relation with neighbors and also its relation with EU. About the U.S. focus and U.S. interest in Central Asia and mainly in Caspian Sea, I have to say, as I mentioned during the Clinton administration and after breakup of the Soviet Union, the U.S. tried to help these countries try to recover their economy because they has a very, very good bad condition, and also trying to support EU because, as you know, Gazprom and Russia play monopoly and play an important role in EU natural gas market. As you are now aware, EU as a US ally and US trying to support EU to diversification of energy resource and trying to find the alternative for Russian gas and natural gas mainly from Azerbaijan is one of the alternative and to EU to decrease dependency of Russian foreign policy and also for energy and new pipeline in the region was a good opportunity to U.S. Energy firms such as Exxon and Chevron to work in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan oil field. U.S. has own economic interest and also political and geopolitical interest. But during Obama administration, we can focus later. U.S. lost its interest in the region, and after shale gas revolution and after Obama administration came to conclusion that the U.S. has to withdraw its troops from the region, especially from the Afghanistan, Central Asia and military bases in the Central Asia lost its value in U.S. foreign policy and U.S. energy diplomacy toward the region. And during Trump administration, we saw such policy, and Trump and Obama and also Bush lost their interest, and mainly during Obama administration, the shale gas revolution, U.S. totally lost interest, just politically trying to support energy transit pipeline from the region, from the EU market, and trying to support Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan as a U.S. ally in the region.
So explain to us how this part of the world, and you can break it down into the different groups, how they view the Russian influence on the oil and gas market. Because we had on a guest just recently talking about that the EU perspective maybe not as concerned about Russian products. They'd rather pay the cheaper price and deal with Russia than import from the U.S. How do you think, by and large, some of these areas you mentioned, you covered a lot of different countries there, how do they feel about dealing with Russia? Because in the U.S., the Russian's a big boogeyman everyone should be scared of, but I don't get the sentiment that's the case worldwide.
It's a great question. Thanks for asking. Before Putin came to power, Russia was at a great weaker position in the international relation and also in the region. When Putin came to power, as you know, Putin held a PhD in economy, and his thesis topic was about the using Russian hydrocarbon as a means of leverage Russia foreign policy toward the global energy market. And when he came to power, tried to use energy export as a leverage of its foreign policy toward the region in general and toward the EU especially. And it's not in favor of US and White House. And the US tried to find an alternative and also try to export LNG to EU to balance Russia hegemony and Russia export to EU natural gas market. At the same time, during Trump administration, U.S. play key energy diplomacy. As you know, by March 2020, the oil price decline was a very bad development for U.S. energy companies, and Trump administration tries to help the companies to help economy and to focus the situation for worker in energy industry. About the Russia, as I mentioned, when Putin came to power, Russia tried to play an important role in both LNG, natural gas, coal, and oil market. And it, as I mentioned, it as the U.S. and Russia, we can contend as a superpower. Any increase in exporting energy as a leverage of foreign policy, it's not in favor of the U.S. And U.S. try to create balance to more focusing on energy market and more focus on international energy market to decrease Russia's role in international relation and international sphere.
And one of the things that we're seeing is you have Russian in their role, as you described, but you also have kind of, I don't know if the rise of China is the right way to put it, but China's trying to, on some level, they've partnered with Russia on some things. There's a lot of people who are kind of confused over how good that relationship really can be. But then you see China starting to cut deals with Iran. They're cutting deals with the Saudis. They're trying to invest in Aramco. What are your thoughts on the Chinese-Russian relationship, A, and then B, how might that impact this area moving forward, an area that's been dominated by Russian influence for some time?
Yeah, in chapter 4, I focus on China foreign policy and China energy policy toward the Central Asia and Caspian Sea, and focus about China One Road One Belt project and the role of Central Asia in completing One Road One Belt project, and this is China investment in some poor countries such as Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan in the region. As you know, China using energy. Debt policy and investing in poor countries to control their infrastructure. As you know, we have some cases in the Sri Lanka, in East Asia, and we have Kenya in the Africa. They use the U.S. China's debts, but where they are unable to pay debt on time, and China control their infrastructure and railroads for 99 years. And U.S. fears that China follows the policy in the region, especially toward the poor countries, as I mentioned before. And by 2014, I think China made a huge investment, about $50 billion in all Central Asia and Caspian Sea region countries in their energy sector, oil and gas, and in infrastructure, and also the agriculture sector. And the U.S. also Russia following China's all investment in the region. I'm sure, as you know, by 2018, the status legal of Caspian Sea. All 5 countries came together in Kazakhstan, and they confirmed the new legal status of Caspian Sea. Russia just important. The security in the region is important for both Russia and China. China just trying to increase their influence in economic sphere. Russia main priority security in the region, and Russia is fair about radicalism in the region who affect some minority living in Russia and also China. This in the security sphere, China is a first power in the region. In economic sphere, China, and as I mentioned, energy resource in the Central Asia and infrastructure could help to China to operate and complete the One World One Belt by coming years.
So some of the people have speculated that the U.S. should almost match kind of China's foreign investment with the One Belt One Road or One Road initiative. I tend to disagree. I tend to think that what the U.S. should do is the U.S. should allow its citizens and its companies to work internationally easier through tax laws and stuff like that. And we should encourage local nations to make their laws clearer and easier to understand so that you can attract smaller businesses to foreign countries to work there instead of trying to go with the One Belt, One Road model. Do you have a thought on how this will work? Because there is a fear in the West that China's influence is really gripping hold. And I actually wonder, is China actually, by the way that these policies are rolling out, are they actually squeezing so hard that it's slipping through their hands?
Yeah, during Obama administration and during Secretary Hillary Clinton, U.S. by 2011 introduced his initiative in New Silk Road and tried to introduce some project and try to give some debt to these countries. But after 2011, we cannot see any major progress in this initiative, and U.S. was unsuccessful to complete its initiative incomplete, but China War Road, One Belt. As China has a huge national financial resource, it gives an opportunity to China to focus in any country to invest in it. But as we can see during Trump administration and also Biden administration, China and South China Sea is one of U.S. Foreign policy priority, and U.S. focus on this area. And as I mentioned before, U.S. lost China in U.S. lost his interest in the Caspian Sea and Central Asia, and I'm not sure that this administration and next administration focus again of Central Asia and Caspian Sea, and in this area, just China will be major actor in economic area, and I think U.S. has to compete with China in other region, not in Central Asia and Caspian Sea.
Yeah, because China's western border, Russia's southern border, they all are adjacent to various nations in this
Yeah,
region. And so even though we can put the Uyghur issue aside and what may be going on there, they do have a population that is far more Caspian Sea region than they
sure.
are Han Chinese. And so with Russia, so there's a lot more ethnic blend there. If you were to cross the border, you wouldn't be able to tell that you would necessarily change countries by the way people talk and act. And so from the U.S. perspective, they are not only far geographically, but as far as some of the people that live in these countries, they're far from that as well. And that makes a difference, whether we like to acknowledge it or not. That's just actually sometimes that is a barrier to overcome.
Yeah, it's a very good question, a good point. Good point, as you mentioned. We have some ethnic groups live in the Russia and other Central Asia, and we have some Uyghur, as you know, living in the China, and the geographical location has a lot of natural resources. China, the government focus on, and as you know, we have some camp West and especially US and EU are against this camping. Some Uyghur lives in the Kazakhstan and Turk and Tajikistan, and they relatively live in the China, and China is first the spread of what they say Islamic radicalism, and due to in some cases Russia and China following the same interests and trying to control the region. As I mentioned, security is the major concern for China, and security and also economic were belong to China, but this major power concern about the security and stability in the region, spread of radicalism, and try to exploit the hegemony in the region. And absence of the U.S. is the great chance for both countries.
So tell me, because this is, I'm actually asking now from ignorance here. So answer as simpleton as you need. So how do these countries consider working together as a bloc? Is there a way that you can unify? Is it a lot of distrust? Is there a lot of similarities? Because when you have these smaller nations being put pressure on by the U.S. or China or Russia, there's sometimes they don't really have the ability to kind of stand up for themselves. They have to kind of go with the whim of the motion. But if they kind of unite together, occasionally they can kind of push back. Are they able to do that, or is it pretty much every man for himself? How does it work out?
Yeah, it's a very good point. You know, in the international relation, every country is just looking its national interest and trying to create a balance in its relation with the neighbor in the great power. And also, in some case, they come to a conclusion to have to solve the problem with the other major actors in the short term to gain more benefit from the coalition. I'm not sure that China and Russia follow any mutual interest in the international relation, but in some cases, as I mentioned in the last question, in the Central Asia and Caspian Sea, maybe both countries follow the same policy and follow the same interest. But in the international relation, international sphere, I'm doubt about both countries follow the same policy and follow the same interest. We can focus on Iran relation with the China, Iran relation with the Russia, and the JCPOA, and the new Vienna talk between U.S. and Iran over the solving the Iran nuclear and missile program, and Iran supporting proxy group in the region, and Iran foreign policy. And we can see that both China and the U.S. trying to keep and increase their influence in Iran foreign policy in the long term, and also trying to solve this problem, because Iran's capability in nuclear and missile is not in favor, and it is against this country's all national interest and national security. But in some cases, in the Africa, China and Russia policy is a difference, and some countries their investment is against other countries' national interest. But as I mentioned before, in the Central Asia or Iran, they both following the same route. But in the Africa or in the other Arab countries, Russia and China has own interests and has own policy, and in some cases, in some region, especially this country's national interest is different from other countries.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that when you talk about these areas, these geographic areas, it really takes almost kind of a multitude of experts, and then kind of a big picture person, and then a narrow focus person, because it's very hard. It's imagine taking the United States and saying, well, the U.S. feels this way about that. It's like, well, okay, maybe the current administration does, or a congressperson does, but it doesn't mean that I do. And then if you just take some, whether they're cultural issues or financial issues, the U.S. has a lot of wide-ranging opinions. Well, now you're talking about countries, and a lot of countries that are a lot close to each other, and it's really tough to kind of grasp how that shapes the way that you think about things. Sitting on the side of it from a superpowers perspective, which is where I sit at, right? I sit on the superpowers perspective. I don't sit on the non-superpowers perspective going, okay, wow, if we make them mad, we could really be in trouble. And you brought up Iran, and this is, I think, really something that the U.S. Foreign policy gurus, wonks, whatever, need to think about, is they want to have influence in Iran. Okay, the only way that will work out is if you had a new regime in Iran. The current regime is not going to bow down to the U.S. That's just not going to happen, which means that if the current regime stays in place, they are going to look to Russia or to China or to wherever else they can sell their oil and to sell because they want to stay in power. And if China offers them the avenue to stay in power, they will look towards China to do energy deals like they did last September, August, whatever it was. So I think that it's something that the U.S. foreign policy for so long, we almost had the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of
My friend.
mentality, right? And we've done that, and that's how we were with China, right? So we partnered with the Chinese because they were the enemy of the Russians, we thought, right? And so then it's like, well, now China's the bad guy. It's like, well, okay, well, who's the enemy of China? Like it's very complex. But let's focus on Iran because it feels like to me right now the Iranians are moving as fast as they can with hesitation, I'm sure level towards the Chinese, the way the Chinese are operating, the way the Chinese are buying. They probably would like the sanctions to be lifted so they can sell their oil at market value, but they are content to sell for below market value to the Chinese until the U.S. quits or something else happens. That's my read. What's your read?
Yeah, very good point. I think during coming weeks or maybe coming coming months, and especially during the administration, Ibrahim Raisi, as you know, 2 weeks ago elected as a new president for 4 years. U.S. and Iran maybe reached new deal, and after new deal, I'm trying to give more information about the oil and gas sector. Iran needs about 20. $100 billion investment in oil and gas field to recover oil and gas production capacity and also to increase oil and gas export because when New Deal reached, and the Biden administration lifted sanction over Iran energy sector, Iran will be able to export more oil. Exporting more oil needs foreign financial capability and foreign high technology. As you know, Iran and Qatar shared South Pales field, and Iran supply 70% of natural gas consuming from this field, and this huge field will be peak point by coming years, and Iran if cannot attract high technology from Western companies, mainly because Iran looks to has such technology to prevent the pressure drop in this field. If this field point reached peak point, the production capacity dramatically decrease every year, and Iran will not be able to supply gas to the domestic network, and Iran has to import natural gas from other country. Iran holds the second natural gas in the world, but if it cannot attract financial capability and technology, Iran has to import and natural gas from the country. During last week's, we have this Iran electricity grid shows power outage, and Iran signed a new agreement from Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan to import electricity from this country. Iran holds a great potential in renewable energy, and also Iran, as you know, just hold one nuclear power plant, and also Iran has a very good dams to generate electricity. If you focus to Iran and US, and also from to China and Iran relation with China and Russia, Iran foreign policy depends on ideological, but Russia, China foreign policy based on national interest. The problem is Iran trying to create balance in its relation with the West, with increasing and boost relation with the China and Russia. If we notice to the last statistic released by Ministry of Economy of Iran to trade volume between Iran and China, Iran and Russia, both China and Russia trade volume in favor of these countries. And as you know, during sanction, China was major Iran oil buyer in gray market, and there is no official statistics in how much Iran sell oil to China and how can they transfer money. As you know, SWIFT is under sanction, and Iran unable to have an international transaction. If we come together and to conclusion, this situation just in favor of Russia and China. Russia has a chance to increase influence in Iran foreign policy. China also has a chance after U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan to influence in the region, and also try to influence in Iran foreign policy. And China and Russia companies, after lifting sanction, has a good chance to invest in all Iran infrastructure, mainly energy and railroad, but also European firms. But the problem is, I think the real problem, U.S. is looking on economic interest in Iran. Iran is a consumer market. Iran holds more than 85 million people. Every company is looking to have own share and stake in Iran market, because Iran has a good potential for every country and for every company.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating point. And one of the things I thought about when you're talking through that is, we talk about the Chinese and the Russian influence. The Chinese, by and large, they seem, like you say, they're going to do their own national interest. Now, I do think on some level that they do things to kind of stick it to the U.S. from time to time. But by and large, if they want to work with Iran or Iraq or North Korea, they're going to do it. And then that's just what they're going to do. The U.S. doesn't necessarily operate that way. So when you look at the Chinese influence in the Middle East, they'll do a deal with Iran, and then they'll do a deal with the Saudis, and they're going to say, if you guys can't get along, that's your own problem. That's your own problem. Whereas the U.S. won't operate that way necessarily. So might that kind of purchase of large oil contracts, natural gas potentially, reinvestment into fields, how might that change how energy policy is considered from OPEC and these nations? Because the Chinese are kind of agnostic. They're like, we've got billions of people to take care of. We need your product. You work out your problems yourself.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Iran and China last March signed a 25-year strategic agreement, and during this agreement, China is going to be major supplier for technology and also major supplier for financial capability for major projects in the Iran, and mainly in the oil and gas sector, and also will be major buyer of Iranian oil. As you know, Saudi Arabia playing key energy diplomacy in the China, and made huge investment in China infrastructure and refinery. And this all OPEC member and all major procedure in natural gas, LNG, and oil, trying to be prepared for post-corona period, and trying to keep their share market in the present, and also trying to increase share in the coming year, because as you know, we after vaccination in all countries, we have seen some sign for recovery in the economy. If economy goes well, we need more oil and gas, and it is a good chance for every country to export oil and gas and to recover their economy as well. China in the GCC countries and the Iran following the same policy, but in different means. In Saudi Arabia, trying to invest in Saudi new projects and Neom City, as you know, Neom Smart City is a huge project. I think it's valued $500 billion, and China is one of major supplier for technology and investment, and also Saudi Arabia is one of major buyer of China jewelry and other high-tech goods, and also the security of the routes with China import oil and gas. It's related to China energy security and national security, and also by 3 decades ago and during ongoing policy, China supported national and private companies to go to the region which China import oil and gas and invest there, and also Chinese some military and mainly Navy trying to focus to the region that China energy diplomacy depend on. And as you know, China has some military base in Djibouti and trying to increase, and has a new bases in the GCC countries and Persian Gulf, and it's not it's against these countries and also U.S. National interest in the region. I think China trying to focus this region because, as I mentioned, U.S. foreign policy priorities that China and South China Sea. China and Russia trying to create balance between this area and that area.
Okay, let's do a couple rapid fire here questions. So give me the biggest misconception about this part of the world that you get, the Caspian Sea area. What's the biggest misconception that someone who hasn't studied the area that they might bring into it? You go, no. Don't think about it like this. Think about it like this.
Yeah, in the Western media and the Western academia, there is a perception that these countries people just trying to sell oil and trying to just sell oil, and they hold a huge reserve of oil and gas and hydrocarbon, trying to sell, and they not have a clear plan for development, and they have no clear idea about the future. But as I'm following the last development, and mainly in the UAE and also in the Saudi Arabia and Qatar and also other GCC countries and other Arab countries, these countries trying to focus on energy transition in the some 20-year and 50-year and 10 years program, trying to invest in renewable energy, trying to invest to some refinery, and also in, as you know, Aramco invests in some refinery in Texas and other countries. Aramco invests in Pakistan, India, and China as a for a major buyer. And also Qatar Petroleum trying to increase the share of LNG in the oil market, and also in LNG and natural gas market. I think some countries trying to conclusion that we have to diversify oil revenue, and by exporting more, not just oil and gas, exporting some petrochemical product, and also investing in trying to prepare the good sphere for attracting foreign technology and foreign financial. As you know, as by 2030, Saudi Arabia under Bin Salman trying to be center of the financial investment from the EU and from the China, and maybe from the Russia, from the US, and also UAE as Dubai trying to invest more capital from the region. I think this country is not just focused on the oil and gas, trying to diversify in economic, trying to recover economy, not depending on the oil and gas, trying to focus in diversifying the economy and revenue from other resources rather than exporting natural gas, oil, and LNG.
Okay, I want to talk about 2050. All the benchmarks that these countries have set. My prediction by 2050 is that the world economy will be far more open and easier to transact by 2050 than any of us can possibly imagine. As we go through these changes on energy transition or sanctions in China and Russia, I actually suspect that we're heading towards a period of more peer to peer or small business ability to transact, the way the supply chains are set up and are going to be revamped
Mhm.
post COVID. I actually think by 2050, my podcast listeners will be able to do business with people in the Caspian Sea area far easier than they ever thought imagined. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Thanks. If any country in the region, Central Asia, Caspian Sea, GCC, and in short, MENA, Middle East, and North Africa, did not follow their new regulation by Paris Agreement and did not focus on energy transition and the decrease of greenhouse emission, and also did not focus on, as I mentioned, Paris Agreement. In the coming year, by as you mentioned, 2015, I think it's there. We can expect that the hegemony of some of this country who not follow this development, we cannot see some hegemony, and some countries maybe how can I say we cannot see some country because we have seen migration due to climate change and climate change. Mainly in this area, we have water shortage in these countries. If these countries did not focus on high techs to solve the water problem and did not follow the energy transition and also Paris Agreement, we can see many dramatic development in this country and in some small country in the region, both Central Asia, Caspian Sea, and in the GCC and MENA.
Oops, sorry, mute there. Okay. So where can people? We'll link to the book. The book again is called "The U.S. Energy Diplomacy in the Caspian Sea Basin: Changing Trends Since 2001."
Yeah.
You're also active, I believe, on Twitter and LinkedIn. Is there anything else? Anywhere else we point people to find you if they want to find out more about your work?
Yeah, at present I am working in energy transition in Iran and in the US as a book chapter and some editor working on the book project and will be published by the next year. As you mentioned, I am consulting with international and national media and national energy and foreign policy think tank and about what's going on in the region. After a PhD in the postdoctoral, I am focused on energy transition and at present mainly about the Iran and the Russia relation, Iran and the US relation, and the Iran and the New Deal, and about my book. I just wanted to show the book for your yes. Yeah, this book, and this is the first book in the world which published about U.S. energy diplomacy. As I mentioned, it's not just about energy diplomacy regarding Caspian Sea. It's about the U.S. Foreign policy and the role of energy in U.S. foreign policy, shale gas revolution, Trump administration maximum pressure policy, the role of shale gas in U.S. foreign policy, the role of shale gas revolution in international relations, and the role of shale gas revolution in Obama administration and Trump administration sanctions toward Iran energy sector. And as I mentioned, this is the first book which published in this topic. And this is I worked for 5 years in writing this book. And as I mentioned, interview with 100 diplomat, bureaucrat, and ambassador, and also foreign and energy policy analyst. Read more than 1,000 paper, report, and news in English, in Turkish, in Persian, and in Arabic, and that's it.
Well, another thing is, if you are a Kindle reader, you can rent the book for a period of time on Kindle for a substantial discount. You can buy it outright. Go ahead and buy it outright. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying if you go, it's kind of more of a textbook feel to it, right?
Yeah.
And so if you say, okay, well, listen, I don't have the budget, you can actually get on Kindle for a discount if you rent it for a month or 2 months or whatever it is. So be sure to check out that option as well if you are a Kindle reader. Thank you for doing this. We've been talking about this for a few months now. It's great to finally get you on, and you were so knowledgeable about all this stuff. It's always great to talk to someone who actually knows what they're talking about, unlike me who pretends to know what I'm talking about. So it's quite great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And for the last word, I just devote this book in loving memory of my parents. And yeah, and
why the parents?
Yeah, thank you.
Explain that.
Yeah,
go ahead and unpack why you did it for your parents as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And I hope to have the new book by next year. As I mentioned, this year I am writing 2 book chapters, and I'm planning to have new book about energy transition next year.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and I hope your parents are very proud of you and the work that you did. I'm glad you mentioned all of the background work because I usually ask authors to take the victory lap to talk about all that they did the process because most people, when you write a substantial book like you did, which is not a flippant, hey, how to close a sale in 20 days, or how to make yourself better. It's a substantial scholarly type of effort that you went through. That's a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of cutting, a lot of adding, a lot of trying to weave multiple languages. So I'm glad you got that out there, and I hope your parents are very proud of the work that you did. Best of luck, and look forward to your next book.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and stay safe.